This week on the Steele Report.
We know that there are at least 22 votes that should have been counted, that were lawfully cast, that were not considered.
Democrat Rita Hart still trying to overturn her 6-vote loss to Dr. Marionette Miller Meeks in the 2nd District. And our program begins right now.
Now from KWWL, this is the Steele Report.
And welcome to this week's edition of the Steele Report. The margin of victory for Republican candidate Dr. Marionette Miller Meeks, a mere 6 votes over her Democratic challenger Rita Hart in Iowa's 2nd Congressional District. This race, by the way, turned out to be the closest congressional race in the country this year. Now, earlier this week, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said she was going to go ahead and provisionally seat in the House of Representatives Dr. Marionette Miller Meeks, even though there is a challenge coming from Democrat Rita Hart. Rita Hart says she believes there are votes out there that should have been counted but were not counted in this race. She explains for this program.
What's your next step? Are you just kind of waiting around to see if the House is going to take this up, or do you know at any point what's going to happen?
No, we filed that on last Tuesday, and so the Miller Meeks campaign has 30 days to respond to that petition. And then the committee, the bipartisan committee, has the opportunity to take this up and determine what they think is the right steps to go forward. So yeah, we're waiting to see what happens when we get to that point.
So about 400,000 votes were cast in your race, and it comes down to 6 votes. So no matter what happens, you can always say, I was part of a very historical American political election, particularly in the state of Iowa. So have you thought much about that, what it means going forward, whether or not it goes in your favor, or if Dr. Miller Meeks stands as the certified winner? What's this mean to you personally?
Yeah, so it is a really unbelievable moment that we are in this race that is tighter than any we've had in Iowa in 100 years, and that it is the closest contest in the entire country. It's definitely a record breaker. But the important thing to me is that we get the result that was intended by the voters. And that's why what we're asking for is to make sure that every vote is counted. And through this process, we certainly have discovered that there were a lot of things about the recount process that need to be changed. And as a result, we know that there are at least 22 votes that should have been counted, that were lawfully cast, that were not considered. And to me, it's so important, that people have died for our right to vote. And it's so important that we not only have the right to vote, but that those votes get counted. And so to me, that's the most important lesson of this entire campaign, is that every vote does count. And if we don't see that here in a race of 400,000 votes that come down to just a handful, I just think it's so important that we do this right.
Recently, you mentioned a voter named Crystal, I won't give her last name, who said her vote was done by absentee and had been sent in early but did not count. But is that an example, really, though, where people, if they're going to vote absentee, they've really got to vote as early as possible to make sure that it does get there on time?
It did arrive on time. She placed it in a drop box in time, but in a different county. And that's totally within the legal limits here. So she is a community college kid, cast her vote for the first time, happy to do that, wanted to make sure it got there on time. So she placed it in that drop box in time, and then it failed to get from one county to the other. And so that ballot to me should be counted. And I think that we can all put ourselves in that position of, when we take the time and the energy and we want our vote to count, we do it in a lawful manner, that every vote should count. We know that happened to many others, in different circumstances, right? To people of disability who called ahead and cast a curbside ballot, and again did that in a timely fashion, in a legal fashion, and those 2 votes simply didn't get counted. Other instances where people received a ballot in the mail where the return envelope was damp and therefore was sealed, and they had to open it in order to put their ballot in and return it. One individual who worried about it had her mother call the county auditor to make sure that it was okay that she sealed it again, taped it shut, and was assured that her vote would still count. Even went to the step of writing on the ballot that I received this ballot and this envelope and it was already sealed, so I taped it shut, and still the ballot didn't count. These are votes that we want to make sure that people's voices get heard.
Now, you do realize you're sounding an awful lot like a Republican right now in this election.
Because we want votes to count. I don't know. That to me is just our basic American principles that we want to make sure that not only that we have the right to vote, but that each of those ballots gets counted.
So have you had a chance to see these 22 ballots? Do you know how the vote would have gone? You would need 15 votes to win by a vote over Dr. Miller Meeks. Do you know what the outcome of those ballots are? Have your folks?
So that is all outlined in the petition. That was part of the process that we received affidavits from these people who cast these ballots and indicated who they voted for and that they want their ballot to count. And I'd also add, that of these 22 ballots, 18 of them were cast for me for this campaign. 3 of those were cast for the Miller Meeks campaign. One of them did not vote in this particular race. So again, it just underscores that when we look at this, we want to make sure that every vote counts, no matter who they vote for. And I think that's the other important point to make, is that we know that there were ballots that were cast in some counties where undervotes and overvotes were looked at for voter intent, and other counties where it did not happen.
I don't think Iowans would fault you for asking for a complete recount in all of the 24 counties in the 2nd district, but I think a lot of Iowans at least have told me that, okay, why did you choose not to use the court system, and use the nonpartisan Iowa judicial panel? That's a pretty legitimate question. Is it coming from Iowans? Because we know it's going to be 50-50. Obviously, if you have 50% are going to not like what you've done and 50% are going to say, yes, go for it. So why not use the court system? And I think you said something about the timeliness of it, but tell us a little bit more about that.
That was the entire situation there, is that by Iowa law, if we took that to the Supreme Court, that the decision would have to be made by December 8th. That left 6 days for 5 judges to come up with a process. They had to come up with the process first. They had to determine who those judges would be, come up with the process, and then come to a decision in 6 days. When we knew that 72 recount folks across the district were not able to do that in close to 2 weeks. So there was just no way that we were going to be able to get a complete recount if we went that route. And so there were 2 options there. And I thought that this is the option that makes the most sense, because it can get us to the remedy that would get us to that complete hand recount, which clearly is the only way to know exactly how this election turned out.
We will continue our discussion with Democratic challenger Rita Hart in the 2nd Congressional District in just a moment. Welcome back to this week's edition of the Steele Report, as Democratic challenger Rita Hart explains her efforts to overturn the election results.
Several of the large newspapers in Iowa that did support you and endorse you during the campaign are now saying that this is ill-advised a way to take it forward. So what's your thought process on that, with these large influential newspapers now saying that maybe you've made a mistake here?
Yeah, it's interesting because what they also said was that I was right about everything, right? They said, she's right. This is too close. It's 6 votes out of 400,000 and that every vote should count. They said that, yes, she's right about that. They also said, she's right. This recount process was flawed. It's inconsistent and it left votes on the table that votes did not get that ballots did not get examined that should have been. And they recognized that the time frame was too small with the Supreme Court in order to get that done. And yet they said I should concede and and try again in 2 years. And to me, that just doesn't make sense, especially from a journalistic point of view. Newspapers are supposed to stick up for the right to vote. And that right includes not just the right to actually vote, but to have that vote counted. So if we abandon these voters now in this election, who stands up for them? Whose vote should not count in this election? Doesn't make sense to me.
So this has to be, I don't know the insides and outs of what it would cost to do this, but it has to be a fairly expensive process with a lot of lawyers involved. So I think Iowans have said to me in a couple of instances, so who's paying for these efforts to overturn the certified win of 6 votes for Dr. Miller Meeks? How is that?
So because this race was so close, the recount here in Iowa was paid for by the not every lawyer. The campaign and the Democratic Party has paid for the lawyers and the lawyers on the other side the same. But again, that was another reason why I think it makes sense that we appeal this at the federal level, because we knew that we were not going to get the recount that we needed at the state level. And so that would have just been more time, more energy, more money being spent. And so again, I think the important thing to remember is that we just want to know that every single vote has counted in this election. And the price on that, what is one vote worth? That's the question, I guess, is because this is our basic democracy, that we make sure that every vote counts. And so we need to do whatever we can to make sure that that system is working properly.
So if the House does take this up, you're going to insist that these 22 votes be counted, and you're going to lay out the groundwork for why you feel that is going to happen. So do you have a lead attorney who's going to do that for you? And can you tell us who that is and what's going on along those lines, how they'll present that case?
So that's all within the petition. It includes all the affidavits from the people whose votes did not get counted. All that factual information is in there. And then the Miller Meeks campaign has an opportunity to respond to that, and they will have their legal arguments in there as well. And then it's up to the House what happens next. They will take that information. They will decide what pathway they think is appropriate moving forward. What we're asking for in that petition is that they look at each of these 22 votes that were legally cast and determine if they should be counted or not. And that but we also want that complete hand recount in order to actually know the will of the people.
So a lot of Iowans are going to say, well, the House is controlled by the Democratic Party right now. The lead is slimmer than it was, but it's still enough to kind of get you into office. And some people I've read and have said to me, actually, will this be a tainted victory for you? And as I mentioned earlier, 50% of the people voted for you, 50% voted against you. So it's that's the way Iowans look at it. So, but how are you going to feel about that if you win this election and go in there under this kind of, I don't know if cloud is the right word or not?
So again, I think that's why we could just stop with these 22 votes and try to prove that this puts us, 9 votes up. But the integrity of this election is that every vote is counted. So that's why it's so important that we get the complete hand recount so that we know that every vote was counted and this is the result, no matter how that turns out. And, I've asked this question many times, that that if this goes in a way, we don't have control over what the House decides to do. But if this is not done in a fair way, if we're not going to get the examination of these votes that we need in order to know the actual results of this contest, then if that's not going to be done in a way that is fair and that gets to the examination of the votes, then I will drop this petition. Because that's the crux of the matter, is that we make sure that every vote is counted.
Let's say the House decides that you're not the winner in this race, you're willing to accept that then?
As long as every vote is examined, as long as we know the will of the people.
So history is not on your side. There have been over 100 contested races that have actually gone to that House Administration Committee over the last 100 years or so. And I think only 2 or 3 or 4 times have they actually gone in favor of the challenger. So you're kind of up against some long odds too.
Well, again, to me, this is just about, as we have said many times here, this process has been flawed. We don't know the will of the people. Mistakes were made. People's votes didn't get counted that should have gotten counted. We have ballots that did not get examined for voters' intent. They did get examined in some counties and not in others, so it wasn't fair. It was inconsistent. We need to make sure that every vote is counted and then let the chips fall where they may. But that's the important thing, is that we have an opportunity to make sure that every person's vote got counted.
Now, not surprising, the Republican members of the Iowa congressional delegation, particularly Senators Grassley and Ernst, are basically saying that you are going to the House to let House Speaker Nancy Pelosi fix the race for you. So respond to that, will you?
I am going to the House to make sure that people who cast a ballot that did not get counted because of human error, because of something falling through the cracks. When we have people who received a ballot in the mail that was wet, and therefore the envelope was sealed, and they had to open it up and cast their vote and then seal that up with a tape, and then they got penalized. Their vote didn't count because they did everything that they could to make sure it did count. That's not right. It's not fair. And that vote should count. That's what I'm taking it to the House to make sure, is that we're standing up for these people who legally cast their ballots, who want their ballot to count, and it did not get counted. It's not right, it's not fair, and we should make sure that it happens.
Does this go before the entire House or just the administrative committee, as far as you know?
It goes in front of the committee. The committee determines what they need to do in their investigation. And we're asking them to conduct that hand recount. And if they choose to do that, then they would enlist the help of the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, to do that recount. And that's the remedy we're seeking.
So let's say the roles are reversed here and you're the winner by 6 votes. Would you expect that Dr. Marionette Miller Meeks would do the exact same thing that you're doing?
Well, yes, I hope that she would join me in this to make sure that every vote was counted, that when we have a race this tight and every vote matters, we not only have an obligation to make sure that those votes are counted, but I hope the one good thing that comes out of this is that we do have legislative change, because again, every one of these articles that has been written about this situation have agreed that the process was inconsistent, that errors were made, that changes need to come about as a result, so that this doesn't happen to anyone else. So again, I would hope that everyone would agree that it's important that every vote is counted. I mean, whose vote should not count is the ultimate question here. They should all count.
And we'll wrap up Rita Hart's challenge in the 2nd Congressional District in just a moment. And welcome back to our final segment on this week's edition of the Steele Report. I asked Democratic challenger Rita Hart what changes she would like to see in the future in Iowa's election process.
The changes that need to be made so that there is consistency across the district, so that if you cast a ballot in a particular way, that it doesn't matter which county you're casting it gets considered in the very same way, and that recount process not be done in a realistic fashion, so that the time constraint does not become a deciding factor. I think there's plenty to look at here to make changes for the better. And I certainly hope that happens.
So Dave Loebsack has told me on a couple of the different occasions that without Iowa City, he would probably not have won as many races as he did. Is there anything you would have done differently in your campaign to make sure that it doesn't come down to 6 votes? Is there an area that you say, I wish we'd have done this, or I wish we'd have done that? But winning Iowa City is critical, isn't it?
Oh, certainly. And, to me, every vote is critical. And so there's always things that we can do to improve. And yeah, we hindsight is always 2020. But I really believe that we ran a great campaign. It was a positive campaign. We talked about what this campaign is about. We presented that in a positive fashion. We got out to the people. We worked hard, especially in the time of a pandemic. We had to do things differently, and it wasn't an easy time to campaign. I had great people working for me. We just are in a situation here where this was a tough race, and it was just like we thought when we came into the race. This is a toss-up district, and it's going to be tight to the very end. That's exactly what happened.
A lot of people know that you're a former teacher. You spent several years in the state legislature. You were on Fred Hubbell's ticket as running mate in 2018 and almost won that race. What have you learned about Iowans and in particular politics here in a very, very difficult and expensive race for Congress?
It's a tough thing to do in the time of a pandemic. That's what I learned. And that, again, it's not rocket science to understand that people are wanting good representation, and they're looking to find that in different ways. And so to me, this is all about just listening to people, making sure that they know that I am listening to them, that their voices are being heard, and that we actually do something about the things that we hear.
What's something you'd like to see Congress do to help Iowa farmers?
There's so many things, that we are facing challenges with right now. Here, particularly on this farm, we went through the derecho on top of a tough market year and a lot of additional challenges. And so, but we are looking for an opportunity to do what we do best, and that is to plant these crops and do the best we can to make sure that the world is being fed, and so we just need the opportunity. And so I'd like to see us strengthen our marketing opportunities across with various countries. I'd like us to be able to make sure that we're doing right by the environment. I'd like us to have an opportunity to have the kinds of markets where we don't need to have the assistance in the future. And we need to do something to contribute to the overall discussion about climate change. I think farmers are in a great position to sequester carbon, to put into place the practices that we know are going to help farmers in the future to be able to always plant the crops that we need to in a timely fashion and in a way that is helpful to the environment.
And thank you to Democrat Rita Hart for taking the time to give us her perspective on her challenge to the election results in the 2nd District. And we should know sometime in the near future what action, if any, the U.S. House of Representatives might take in this historic Iowa congressional election. That's it for this week. A reminder, all of our programs are online on the KWWL.com homepage. Find the Watch tab, then go on right down to the Steel Report. That's it for this week. Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll see you next week right here on the Steel Report.